Let's ask ourselves a simple question. What is Lacan's Écrits? First, we must juxtapose the Écrits, Lacan's written work, against what it is not, Lacan's oral seminars, in order to better understand what they are positively in and for themselves. Lacan's seminars move in three phases, an early, middle, and late. The early seminars are what is often referred to as Lacan's imaginary phase, which can be organized chronologically in between 1951 and 1963, when he was teaching at St. Anne Hospital. Here we find seminars on Freud's technique and theory of the ego, as well as seminars on transference, identification, and towards the end, anxiety. This is referred to as Lacan's imaginary phase because Lacan is thinking primarily about the ego in clinical settings, and the ego, for Lacan, is an imaginary phenomenon. The middle seminars are often referred to as Lacan's symbolic phase, which can be organized chronologically in between 1963 and 1969, when his teaching is shifted to an elite school, École Normale Supérieure. Here we find seminars focused on fundamental concepts, critical issues in institutional analysis, the logic of fantasy, as well as the relation between the one and the other. This is often referred to as Lacan's symbolic phase because Lacan was shifting his focus towards concepts, laws, and the role of social institutions and principles of intersubjectivity in forming analytic practice. The late seminars are often referred to as Lacan's real phase, which can be organized chronologically in between 1969 and 1980, when his teaching shifted to a law school, Place du Panthéon. Here we find seminars on discourse beyond semblances, feminine sexuality, symptome, and topology. This is often referred to as Lacan's real phase because he is focusing on language beyond law, femininity and enjoyment, as well as formalizing his final topographies of the subject. In total, this is Lacan's oral teachings, in chronological order, moving from the beginning of Lacan's thinking to his later thinking, from his work in a hospital clinical settings to his work in more academic and ultimately legal settings. However, crucially, this is not the only way to understand time in Lacan. Lacan also introduced the idea of logical time, and we can also represent his seminars as logical time to demonstrate the difference with chronological time. Instead of thinking about the development of his thought in a linear chain, we must think about it as a nonlinear simultaneity or interconnectedness of thought. The moments of logical time follow the moments of the instant of seeing, the time for understanding, and the moment of concluding. This logic of time was inspired by Lacan's clinical work, but can be more generally applied to thinking the structures of someone's thought, less tied to clock time, and more connected to how thinking processes actually unfold and structure themselves. For Lacan's seminars, the instant of seeing was precisely about his critique of ego psychology and the way the specular imaginary was thought and worked with in Freud's institutions. During this moment, Lacan set forth to transform ego psychology, and his return to Freud was mostly motivated by the way in which the ego was situated in the analytic clinic. Lacan's time for understanding was basically the consequence of this instant of seeing, where he spent most of his intellectual time questioning Freudian institutions and the way in which Freudian scholars understood or did not understand the role of the death drive in psychology. Lacan also spent a lot of time questioning the role of the symbolic in analysis, shifting focus to the method of free association, which puts a primacy on speech. In all of this, Lacan often wondered, do analysts even exist? Finally, Lacan's moment of concluding involved thinking of subjectivity in terms of topology, formulating geometric structures in the form of knots, strings, and loops, as well as thinking about how the real, as distinct from both the imaginary ego and the symbolic laws, has profound implications for both registers. It is only in this final phase, his moment of concluding, that we get the appearance of the fully formed Borromean chain and the famous triad of the imaginary, symbolic, and the real. So, now we can ask ourselves again, in this context, what is the Écrits? The Écrits are Lacan's writings as distinct from his oral seminars. The Écrits were published in 1966, chronologically speaking, right in the middle of his symbolic phase, and are composed of papers that were written throughout the 1950s and the 1960s. Consequently, what we find in the Écrits is Lacan in his imaginary and symbolic phase of writing, with lengthy and philosophical reflections on the critical distinction between the ego and the subject of the unconscious, as well as the relation of the subject of the unconscious to the notions of symbolic law. We can also think of the Écrits within the context of logical time, where we find papers that are related to Lacan's instant of seeing, that is his critique of ego psychology and the nature of the specular imaginary, as well as Lacan's time for understanding, that is his questions of the Freudian institutions, their teaching or lack thereof teaching the death drive, as well as thinking through the role of the symbolic in analysis. However, we have no writings from Lacan related to the real phase, which on the one hand disappointing and on the other hand makes a type of metalogical sense, in the sense that in the real phase he had moved beyond his symbolic phase. Consequently, when we look to the Écrits, we see Lacan in his process of coming to be Lacan. We do see thinking in terms of structures, but not topologies. We see him introducing the imaginary symbolic real, but the focus is still on the movement from the imaginary to the symbolic, whereas the real is not yet a fully developed concept at this stage of his becoming. Lacanian philosopher Slavoj Žižek has written a text that may be helpful to reflect on in the context of thinking about the distinction between Lacan's seminars and Écrits, specifically with reference to what and how to read both dimensions of Lacan's work. Quote, "So what and how to read, Écrit or seminar? The only proper answer is a variation of the old tea or coffee joke. Yes, please, one should read both. If you go directly to the Écrit, you won't get anything. So you should start, but not stop, with the seminars, since if you read nothing but the seminars, you also won't get it. The impression that the seminars are clearer and more transparent than the Écrit is deeply misleading. They often oscillate, experiment with different approaches. The proper way is to read a seminar and then go on to read the corresponding Écrit so as to get the point of the seminar." End quote. Thus, Žižek is suggesting we oscillate between both seminars and Écrits in such a way that both mutually inform each other, the clinical Lacan of the seminars and the philosophical Lacan of the Écrits. This makes a lot of sense, but it also opens a question. What are we supposed to do with Lacan's real phase, where we do not have corresponding Écrits? This brings me to a recent discussion that I had with Lacanian theorist Samuel McCormick. McCormick suggests that the final papers of the Écrits are a bridge to the seminars in the real phase. Quote, "Once you have read the Écrits, move forward into late 1960s Lacan. From seminar 16 to 17, you get the knowledge-truth discourse cluster really worked out, and it is a really natural flow from the Écrits into the later Lacan seminars. I offer this as an invitation to really start moving into seminar 16 and 17. These texts are ripe and ready once people have dabbled in the Écrits." End quote. With this advice, while we can never find corresponding Écrits for the seminars in the real phase, we do have a connecting point which can anchor us when we study later phase and concluding moments of Lacan's work. And there you have it, the Écrits. Now, if you want a deeper guide when tackling the Écrits, Philosophy Portal has taught a full-length course on the entire text. You can find this full-length course at philosophyportal.online, where there are classes corresponding to every chapter of Lacan's writings. These courses give you access to the materials for life, and function as a great companion to any serious, deep reading. Philosophy Portal also has a curriculum opening up the foundations of modern philosophy. If you are interested in learning the foundations of Hegel's phenomenology and logic, Nietzsche's Zarathustra, or contemporary philosopher Alenka Zupanchic's work on sexuality, you will find in-depth courses at philosophyportal.online. Philosophy Portal also offers philosophical guidance, one-on-one sessions, where our point is not to change your life, but rather to open a space for the philosophical interpretation of your personal life. Philosophy made personal. Philosophy Portal is also becoming an event space. If you become a member, we will be hosting 4 sessions a month throughout 2024. These events will be a great place to meet live guests and discuss with others interested in philosophy about the personal connection between one's own life and thinking. And that was Lacan's Écrits. Thanks for watching.